Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel, Jackson's Journal. My name is Matthew Jackson, and welcome to another edition of a series I'm doing called Gospel Stories Series. And in this edition, I want to talk about Jesus and the storms. The Gospels record two incidents during Jesus' 3.5-year public ministry where he encountered storms, or he was involved in a storm. And this is involved on Lake Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee, as most people refer to it, at least in biblical terms. Just to give you an idea, the Sea of Galilee is really, as far as bodies of water are concerned, it's really not all that big. There are a lot of lakes around the world that are much bigger than the Sea of Galilee is. The Sea of Galilee is actually 64 square miles. To give you some perspective, if any of you are familiar with the Lake Vermilion in northeast Minnesota, that lake is 64 square miles. So those two lakes are about the same size of body of water that we're dealing with. Now, in order to understand both of these stories, you got to understand the context, because there were a lot of villages and towns that had settlements along the shore of Galilee. Oh, this is my cat Bonhoeffer. I think he wants to add something to the teaching. You want to say something? No? Okay. Well, then sit there and be still. Anyway, there were towns and villages all around the perimeter of the Sea of Galilee. And so when somebody wanted to go to another town on the shore of Galilee, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So you'd get in a boat and you just go across the lake to the town or village you wanted to go to, as opposed to walking around on land. It was just more feasible. So obviously there was a lot of fishing going on. The Sea of Galilee produced a lot of fish, and it supported the local economy. But in addition to that, it was a good transportation medium as well. And so I want to talk to you about two particular incidences in the Gospels about that. Now, the first one is, let me give you the scriptures. This is where Jesus was sleeping in the boat. They were in a storm. The disciples woke him up, and Jesus got up and rebuked the storm. It's that story. That story actually occurred about just a little after 2 years of ministry, 2 years after him being baptized by John the Baptist. This happened sometime in the fall. And the scripture references for this story can be found in Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, Mark 4, verses 36 through 41, Luke 8, 22 through 25. So just these three Gospels record this story. John took the day off on this story here. But let me go ahead and just give you the story. This is the first story of Jesus dealing with a storm in the Gospels. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along meaning Jesus, and he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. As they sailed, Jesus fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples went and woke him, said, "Lord, save us, we are going to drown." He got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." So that's the first story of Jesus dealing with the storm in the Gospels. And again, that's 2 years into his 3.5-year ministry. Now, fast forward another 6 months to the springtime. Now he's 2.5 years into his ministry. And this is where he was walking on water. This is the walking on water scene. Now, this This story is recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels. It's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and John. So Luke took the day off on this story. But you can find this story in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 23, Mark 6, 45 through 51, and then John 6, 17 through 21. Now this story goes as follows. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. After he had dismissed them, he went to the mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. But the boat was already a considerable distance when they had rowed about 3 or 3.5 miles, or 5 or 6 kilometers if you want to go metric. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough, and they buffeted the boat was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. Jesus was about to pass them. Now, the 4th watch, we're talking about anywhere from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. So this is before dawn. He saw his disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. They saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. They were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear because they all saw him and were terrified. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So those are the 2 incidences where Jesus dealt with storms specifically. Now, there's a lot of takeaways that we can get from these 2 stories, because storms can be a metaphor for life. I mean, there's times we run into real storms like hurricanes and tornadoes, but you can lose a job, you could have a death in the family, you could say this kung fu virus, coronavirus thing, whether or not you think it's a hoax or whether or not you think it's for real, it's causing problems, okay, with all this social distancing and shutdown, quarantine, and it's a disruption. So it's a storm of sort. Or we have a lot of riots now going on, a lot of racial tension, a lot of looting. That could be a storm on a more social level. So any disruption in your life that's not good, that's unhealthy, could be called a storm. It's a metaphor, okay? So in both of these cases, Jesus was the guy that calmed the storm. He's the one that says, "Do not be afraid." He's the guy that encouraged us to have faith and don't doubt. Now, take the first story where Jesus was supposedly sleeping in the boat. Now, I think he really was sleeping in the boat when they took off from the shore, but once the storm hit, I think the storm woke him up. But I think Jesus just elected to remain laying down with his eyes closed to give the appearance that he was sleeping. Because in Mark's gospel, one of the disciples says, "Teacher, don't you care if we drowned?" So he sensed that there was some apathy on Jesus's part. Even though Jesus was with them in the boat, going through the storm with them, he felt that Jesus was apathetic and didn't do enough. And now there's one really interesting thing to note here. After 18 months of ministry, Jesus finally filled his entire roster of disciples, the full 12 disciples. He didn't get all 12 of his disciples until a year and a half into his ministry. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. Now, those scriptures where Jesus finally assembled all 12, that can be found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew 10, verses 1 through 2, Mark 3, 13 through 16, and then Luke 6, 12, and 13. Those are the scriptures that talk about Jesus calling the 12. So earlier in Jesus' ministry, Jesus already had Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and maybe a couple other guys, but he was only rolling with a half a crew in the earlier part of his ministry, and he didn't really get his full crew, like I said, until a year and a half in. But when he got all 12, he commissioned them, giving them the authority to preach the gospel. But in addition to that, he gave them the authority to drive out evil spirits or drive out demons. Also gave them authority to heal every disease and sickness. So they had authority the moment that the 12 were officially assembled together a year and a half into Jesus' ministry. Now you fast forward 6 months when they're out on the lake, and Jesus says, "Well, why did you doubt, O ye of little faith?" Well, it never dawned on the disciples that the authority that they had to cast out demons and to heal people of diseases and sickness, they could transfer that same authority to command the storm to be calm. Technically, Jesus really didn't need to get up and calm the storm. The disciples could have done it. And that's basically what I think Jesus was trying to tell the disciples in that story when he said, "Oh, you of little faith. Why did you doubt?" Let me get the specific thing that Jesus said here. Yeah, why are you so afraid? Do you have no faith? Now, afraid was used twice. Once in the boat, sleeping in the boat story, why were you so afraid? But then when he was walking on water and they were in a storm, he said, "Be not afraid." So there's a message there when we face storms, is to be not afraid. Now let's get to the walking on water part. Now, I've heard, I've been a Christian for a long time, basically all my life, but how many times have you heard this story delivered in a message, and the pastor would say, "Yeah, Peter, man, he was impulsive and he got out of the boat, but he looked at the wind and took his eyes off Jesus and lost his faith and started to sink." And Peter kind of gets a bad rap in this story. But in my opinion, I think he deserves some props here. I think Peter deserves some love here. He's the one of the 12 disciples. He was the only one willing to get out of the boat, leaving his comfort zone. And when you're in a boat or you're in a storm out in the middle of the water, the boat is the most comfortable, stable place that you can be, as opposed to being out of the boat. Okay? Peter was willing to leave his comfort zone and walk to Jesus. He may have failed in the end, but I've always believed it's better to try something and fail at it than to have not tried it at all. The other 11 didn't even bother to get out of the boat. Can you imagine the conversation Peter was having with his fellow disciples before he got out of the boat? "Hey guys, I'm going to get out of the boat and go walk to Jesus. Anybody want to come with me? Guys, anybody? No? And the other disciples are going, "No, Peter, we're good. You're the man. Go for it, man. Let's see you do it." So, yeah. Where were the other 11 disciples? They were staying in the boat, you know. So, yeah, let's give Peter his props. So, that's basically it. When you face storms, we can learn from these two stories. Number one, do not be afraid of the storm. Jesus is bigger than whatever storm you're in. And if you're a disciple of Christ, if you're a Christian, you have authority to command those storms. Okay? So that is my lesson for today. Thank you for joining me. If you like my videos, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any comments, please feel free to comment. Also, if there's any gospel story that you want me to talk about in my teaching videos, send me a message and I'll see what I can do. And above all else, please click that subscribe button. And when you do, there will be a notification bell. Click the all part right here. And so that way you'll be notified when I upload a video. So, thank you for watching, and God bless, stay safe, and don't be afraid. Ciao.